Well, hello. I'm Sue Hutchins, and welcome to yet another session in the series of Iowa Prison Perspectives. This series, some of you have been here before, so you know, but for those of you who don't know, this is a series that is a collaboration among Iowa Justice Action Network, Living Beyond the Bars of Iowa, and Iowa Cure. The purpose that we're doing this and that I'm doing these interviews is to inform you, the public, about the prison system in Iowa and the justice system in Iowa from people who have been incarcerated, from people who love someone who's incarcerated, from people who have worked for the Department of Corrections at one time or another, and from advocates such as myself, so that you have a broad perspective and a broad knowledge of what the prison system in Iowa is like. I have a Gmail account, and that account is iaprisonperspectives.com, and it's iaprisonperspectives.com. And I would love to hear from you. If you agree with what we're saying, if you disagree with what's being said, if you just have some comments about what's being said, if you know somebody that you believe ought to be interviewed for this series, please, any of those, just get in touch with me, because I really want this to be a discussion, and it's for public information. That's the whole reason that I'm doing this series. Today we're particularly fortunate. It's not very often in the public's lifetime that they get to hear from someone who was at one time the director of the Department of Corrections in the state of Iowa. And today we are very fortunate to have Jerry Bartruff, who was in that position. He actually ran the Department of Corrections, and I will let him tell you what his tenure was for that, and I will let him tell you all about it. He's going to talk, from what I understand, he's going to talk about pre-COVID and post-COVID. COVID changed a lot of things, as we know, and what the Department of Corrections, what their mission is, and what they would like to be able to do. So I'm going to turn it over to Jerry and enjoy his talk, because he is awesome. Here you go, Jerry.
Thanks, Sue. I'm very excited about this opportunity to talk about the work that I've done. And I also think it's an opportunity to talk in big picture, now that I'm not involved in all the politics that go on with corrections, the big picture of crime and punishment and re-entry, and how does a Department of Corrections make opportunities for people to be successful when they're released. And our mission statement continues to be, and we worked really hard on this when I was director. I was director from 2015 until 2019. And one of the first things that we did as a group was we got together and we talked about our mission statement. We thought it was important for us to not only identify what we needed to do, but also what it takes to engage the community in this process. And it's communities that we're trying to serve. And helping offenders be successful when they return to the community makes our community safer. So our mission statement is creating opportunities for safer communities. We worked on that really hard while I was in the department. We also devised some significant kind of goals to help us reach that mission. And number one, offender success is our goal. We want people who are under supervision, whether it's in community corrections or in prison, to be successful. If they're successful, we've reduced their risk, they have a job, they're reunited with family, they aren't using drugs and alcohol anymore, and they're a member of our community, so that makes it safe. Secondly, re-entry is our process. And we decided that re-entry should begin when an offender comes to the front door. Don't wait until the parole board says, get out of here. Start to plan and assess the offender so that we can identify the risk, because we're going to focus our resources on those most likely to reoffend. Because if we can reduce that population, our communities are safer. So the reentry process begins at, when I was in office, it began at admission. And that's something that we had to change, because it wasn't really the philosophy and thought prior to that, but we were going in that direction. And then the third kind of goal is make sure that we use evidence-based practices as our tools. We didn't want to do any kind of programming that wasn't proven by the evidence to have the outcomes that we wanted. And so evidence-based practices include assessing risk, identifying needs, and assigning offenders to appropriate programming that is based on evidence that shows it helps the institution be safer, and it also helps the communities be safer. And then our fourth goal to help us meet our mission statement was to recognize that staff is our most important asset. And what we can do to train staff to understand our mission, to be part of the goals, that's going to help our outcomes tremendously. So that was kind of the baseline we established early on in 2015. Around that same time, we got a $1 million grant from the Pew Trust to develop a reentry program in Iowa, and to also get some help from experts in the field to come to Iowa, help listen and learn about what we're doing, and also how can we improve the reentry process so that when people are released, our communities are safer. So that was huge to have the involvement from a national organization like that. They spent several weeks here. We continued to communicate during my entire corrections community. I haven't talked with them lately, but they're a great group of people. And one of those people was Beth Skinner, who is now the director of the Department of Corrections. So Pew was a big help to us and got us going. I think we were moving in the right direction. The governor Reynolds supported what we were doing. Community-based corrections it's about time for the institutions to wake up and do the things that we're already doing in the community. So it was a good time with a little institutional change going on to get on the same page. There was a presentation that we made at the state capitol, and I was one of the speakers. The governor was also a speaker. David Roederer, who's the head of Department of Administrative Services, was also a presenter. And that was an opportunity for us to invite staff, the Board of Parole, the Board of Corrections, people from administrative services to the room and say, we can't do this alone. We will do everything we can to make our institutions safe and to also reduce recidivism so that our prison population falls. And that stuff was all in place. Then there was this little public epidemic called COVID that entered the picture. I just watched a little documentary about San Quentin and COVID. And at San Quentin, they locked everybody down. I think it was over 800 persons incarcerated, and everybody was locked down in a cell. Visitors were not allowed in. There were no classes, there were no programs. It was just like solitary confinement. And I didn't want Iowa to be like that. I wanted us to recognize it's a challenge, but let's not lose what we're trying to do. But we did. COVID began to have such an impact that visitors were no longer allowed in. And visitors are key for the offenders. It's usually their family gets to come in and see them and talk with them, see them face to face, and know how they're doing. That was sad that people could no longer come in. They could talk on the phone, they could send some communications by email, but they didn't visit in person. One of the things, too, that I was very proud of, and that I think is something you've learned about before, when you talk to Mary Cohen, we used to have a choir at the Iowa Medical and Classification Center that was built around the community and people that are incarcerated, using music to get to know themselves and each other and to find a way to express yourself. When you're incarcerated, especially, it's hard to do that on occasion, but music allowed people to express themselves in a different way. Mary brought in a bunch of volunteers. We had about 20 or 30 incarcerated singers, and the music was beautiful. The offenders began to write songs. Mary helped put that into music, and they sang some of those songs. And that was huge. The people from the community, the people from prison, together in the same room, singing for joy. And COVID, unfortunately, ended the opportunity for Mary and the outside singers to come in. That was tragic. And that's a really good demonstration, I think, of the things that we were doing and moving in the right direction, establishing those community connections. And all of a sudden, we just had to go into the shell. And slowly but surely, we made sure that people who had symptoms were vaccinated and all that other kind of stuff. And it was 2 years of, in many ways, erasing everything that we had in process, or at least blurring it, maybe not erasing it all, because we still had the same goals and the same ambitions. But it really is a demonstration of what I think needs to happen in corrections today. It's not just corrections. It's family. It's community. It's people from the outside who know that they're interested in helping people when they get out. There's another really good program in the Johnson County area called Inside Out Reentry. And that's kind of the basis of that reentry stuff I was talking about before, and they use that same kind of process. They make contact with people in prison before they get out. The community makes contact with incarcerated persons before they get out to help them plan what they're going to do when they get out. What are some of the things that they need to address when they get out? What can Inside Out do as far as helping them find housing? And one of the things done is they created a house for people to live in that don't have housing. So that connection to a community nonprofit, recognizing that the community has a great deal of influence on what happens with people that are incarcerated or under supervision. It also works with people that are on work release or parole. So those two things, I think, are really good examples of what we lost with COVID and we're trying to regain. And those two things that I talked about, we're trying really hard to bring Inside Out Reentry and the choir back into the institutions, to have other volunteers come in the institutions, to have our teachers from Kirkwood and other places come in to the institutions and teach again, to have religious volunteers in there that can help offenders recognize and appreciate some assistance in achieving their spiritual growth while they're incarcerated. So that's a brief history of what we tried to do in the Department of Corrections, how COVID affected that, how, unfortunately, the murder of 2 staff persons in Animos, the state penitentiary, on top of we're kind of getting out of the COVID thing, and then that happened. 2 people, a correctional officer and a nurse, were battered to death at Animos. And I can't deny that corrections is sometimes dangerous work. But I do think some of the things that we did with COVID contributed to that, because we didn't have staff responding. We didn't have the resources that we need to supervise people that have tools. And it was tragic. And that happened after I left. And it's been a challenge ever since, because it's, again, created that image of corrections as an agency that doesn't care, that doesn't take care of their people, that doesn't involve family and the community in what they do. But I can assure you that that's the stuff that we need to do. And organizations like Inside Out and what you're doing, Sue, and people in community corrections that understand what we're trying to do, and the community. You and I went to a show at Film Scene Tuesday, and that was people from the community, including the Evangelical United, I can't remember the name of the church, but they have ministers that reach out to people that are incarcerated, to their families. They sponsored this, and the room was full at Film Scene. And they showed us some videos, and some of them I've already talked about a little bit. They showed us the one about what happened in San Quentin with COVID. They showed some other ones about part of corrections and public safety is not just people that are incarcerated or on work release or supervision. It's also the people that in the community have loved ones incarcerated that want to do something. And churches are saying there's a better way. Ministries are saying this. It's not necessarily pushing a religion, but it's talking about the importance of ministering to our fellows and the people that are incarcerated while they're incarcerated and when they get out, and to also, in some ways, do some counseling with trying to get that family reunited again. So to me, and you did a really nice presentation there, Sue, and thank you for that. Inside Out Reentry made a presentation as well. And I really think that inspired me again to recognize if we engage the community is willing to engage with us. But we've got to engage with them first. So that's mostly what I wanted to talk about today, but I did want to say a couple things. Again, back in the past, we did, when I became director, 20% of the prison population was African Americans. That's tragic. 2% of the population in Iowa is African American, but in prison, 20% of the incarcerated persons were African American. That's tragic. We reduced that while I was still working, and it was really helpful. It was really important. It was really necessary. It's still one of the things that we saw in that at the film scene too was It starts with police, this criminal justice system does. And if police are focusing on African Americans and people of color and reacting to them differently than they do to whites, that's going to increase that population in prison. That's absurd, and it needs to change, and people are beginning to realize that. So today, the prison population is 8,417 people behind bars. There are over 41,000 people under correctional supervision. Makes for a ground total of 49,514 people under correctional supervision in the state of Iowa today. We're 20% overcrowded. We're having difficulty finding staff. And I'm talking today, I'm not talking about them. So there is work to do. I think we're capable of doing some things in corrections with working with other partners in the criminal justice system to improve outcomes and make our communities safer. So that's the main stuff I wanted to share with you today. Any questions?
Well, thank you very much, Jerry. Um, if I could just toot the horn of living beyond the bars just a little bit, when you were talking about inside out, making contact with the people who are incarcerated. Prior to COVID, inside living beyond the bars, myself and Mike Cervantes and a returned citizen named Doran were going into the prisons and doing workshops for planning for when people were going to be released. And my part in that was I would talk about the families, and I would make, if they wanted me to, I would make contact with their family members and send them information about some of the pitfalls, unrealistic expectations, that sort of thing. And I could make contact between the family member and the person who was incarcerated, and we could do some work on some of those things prior to release. At that time, Dr. Skinner, we were getting ready. I was going to be able to go into the prisons and actually meet with people on visiting days if they wanted to do some of this work prior to release to avoid some of the unrealistic expectations of what release is all about. But that ended also. Another thing that Living Beyond the Bars does is Mike Cervantes makes contact with the counselors in the prisons and makes contact with different organizations throughout the state. There are about 250 organizations that he is in contact with, that he networks with, and he puts people in contact with the organization in the area where they're going to be released so that they have that set up. So it's not just Johnson County that's doing that with Inside Out. It's statewide through Living Beyond the Bars and through the wonderful work that Mike Cervantes has done. And on the website, livingbeyondthebars.org, there is the book that has the different organizations. There's a booklet that has the different organizations throughout the state that are listed by judicial district. So anybody who has someone who's going to be returning can look in that book and see what organization in their area is best suited to be able to talk to them about work and housing and different resources that are available and that sort of thing. So I just don't want to leave out the wonderful work that Mike has done. And I certainly want to give all the credit in the world to Inside Out. I don't want to leave anybody out of this. It's a large network of people, so that's really important. If you are comfortable enough, and you certainly don't have to do this, but if you are comfortable enough talking a little bit about your personal feelings about lengthy sentences and life without the possibility of parole, and even the need for education in the prison systems, and some of the programs that people are denied because they are lifers. They're not allowed to take some programs. They're not allowed to do apprenticeship. There are a lot of things that they're not allowed to do because they're not going to be released. And so there is no benefit to society for them to take up the time for these programs. So I don't know if you have personal feelings about that. I certainly do. But if I know you know I do. So it just depends on if you're willing to make any kind of comment on lengthy sentences and if you think that there's room for people who have life without the possibility of parole to have a chance, not to be automatically released, but to have a chance at the possibility of parole.
That's a lot, Sue. But I'll do my best here. One thing that before I start to answer your questions, one of the things that I didn't talk about earlier was when I was in the department and continuing to today, the number of people incarcerated that have mental illness continues to increase. Could you imagine being mentally ill and incarcerated in a cell by yourself? We try to do whatever we can in the department to help people manage their illness, to get the medication that they need, to see psychiatrists and psychologists for counseling. But that's a huge population that affects what we do in corrections, both then, when I was director, and now. So we need to make sure that as we start to bring community resources together, that mental health is part of that. It's kind of like, and I'm getting to your question a little bit now, it's like community policing needs to have mental health staff responding to crises. And it needs to recognize, is there a difference? And there is a difference between criminal behavior and somebody's behavior that's schizophrenic or mentally ill. If we have an opportunity at the time of arrest to get those people involved in mental health treatment and we get them stable, they don't need to come to prison because now they know the resources, but community corrections can help them do that. So again, being more specific about your question, I believe that our society does not take very good care of people that are different than us. And that goes as far as race, sex, LGBTQ issues. People are people and they have their own approaches to living. And I think that in the big picture, we need to do a better job in our communities of realizing and accepting that people are different. But what is it that people have in common? They want to go to school. They want to learn. They want to be able to go to church. They want to get a job and take care of their families. Our society doesn't do a very good job today of doing those kind of things. In fact, more often than not, you'll find people under correctional supervision as one of those groups that we're biased against. But to me, it's a bigger problem. It's a society problem that begins in our communities. And if we can help people with mental illness, with drug abuse, reduce the number of incarcerated persons that are not they're persons of color, and work with community corrections to continue that when they get out, I think there's an opportunity not only to make our community safer because there's less crime, but also to keep our community safer because it's more inclusive. So I don't know if that got to what you were asking about, but sometimes I just ran. So.
Yes, I totally agree with what you're saying. When you say that different than our society, I believe you are speaking about European people that are white.
Yeah.
And that goes to white privilege, which is a whole nother subject that not many people, well, some people, not many people really are willing to actually look at that for what it is. Although that is getting better. There are some books out about that. There is some work being done in that direction. So, but that really is a whole nother like 2 hour.
Yeah, and it's a global.
Exactly.
Especially it needs to start in the United States because we incarcerated more people than any other country in the world.
Yes. Yes.
And we got to do something about it.
Right. Well, and then some countries combined. I mean, you can combine a bunch of countries and we still incarcerate more people than them.
And we shouldn't be proud of it. We should
No,
be,
we should not.
and
We
we
should
should
be horrified.
do something.
Yeah. Yes, I totally agree. Well, is there anything else that you want to say? Let me just ask you directly. Do you believe that people who have life sentences ought to have the opportunity to face the parole board to see if they could be released?
I do. And that was part of your question you asked earlier that I didn't really get into. But now I want to talk about that a little bit. If you look at the people who are in prison, most people are eligible for parole if they're a nonviolent offender, if they're a drug offender. Once they come in the door, they get day for day good time and their sentence is reduced. And they can get out before their discharge date if they participate in programming, if they work in the institutions, if they go to school, if that's their needs, they move forward. But for lifers, they aren't getting out. Some. And I think there is a time, and the time is today, that we need to encourage opportunities for people who are serving life sentences without parole to at least begin the commutation process and to see if that couldn't lead to an awareness that this person is ready to go or not. But you have other people from other agencies getting into that. And I think some of the lifers in prison are some of the best people that I met while I was incarcerated. Some worked, but there are some incarcerated persons who made a bad mistake and they were sentenced to a life sentence. And they're adjusting to prison and they're teaching classes to fellow offenders. But they don't have a chance to get out. That's ridiculous, in my opinion. So that's my answer.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you being willing to answer that. A lot of people really don't understand that there are lifers in prison who are very responsible and would be a wonderful asset out here. I know lifers who are more responsible than I am, and I'm pretty responsible. So, I mean, they deserve at least the opportunity. And like you, I don't think everybody should get out of prison. I think prison has a place, and there are people who belong in prison. I just don't think that judgment ought to be made for the rest of their life when they're 19, 20, 21 years old.
Yeah,
And
and
oftentimes on drugs
yeah.
or mentally ill. And, who knows? Yeah, that's just my opinion. So I'm glad you shared that.
And we're on the same page.
Yeah.
But an example, and this is going back to when I was in corrections again.
Mm-hmm.
When I first started working, I worked at the Oakdale facility, and it was a psychiatric hospital. And so people with mental illness who were incarcerated who needed help would transfer to Oakdale and be placed in one of 3 psychiatric units for evaluation, assessment, and treatment. And part of the support system for those people in that place at that time was lifers who were incarcerated, who were establishing a mentorship relationship with those mentally ill people. And that's huge. And it gives not only those people who are serving life sentences a purpose, it gives their life meaning, and it gives them a break from being in the yard or going to the chow hall and all this other kind of stuff. So just a little aside related to what we were just talking about.
Yes, yes. And hospice, there are
Right.
lifers that are hospice workers, and there are lifers that when the dog programs were
Right.
active, lifers were training dogs for support dogs and that sort of thing. So there's a lot of benefit to allowing everybody in prison to feel like they have a purpose and to be useful and have some accomplishments.
And have relationships with other folks that are positive and not
Yeah.
criminal. You know?
Right, right. So, okay. Well, as always, it's been a pleasure. It always is. You know that.
I think, and it's a pleasure to talk to you. I do have to admit that when I was in my director's position, and I worked in corrections for 36 years, when I was director, one of the persons who used to reach out to me fairly often was you.
Mm-hmm.
You wanted to express what you saw, what you were trying to do. Mm-hmm. And you and I developed, I think, a relation. I couldn't do everything you wanted to do, but I wanted to. It's another part of engaging the community, and sometimes it's not always people who like the department; it's people who are challenging the department. And so you and I began our relationship there, and we continue it on the outside. And thank you for that.
Yes, and I really appreciate you too. And you were very open to some of my ideas, which surprised me. Some of them didn't happen because of other powers that be, but you were supportive of them, and I thought that was wonderful. And I still think that I still think a father-daughter dance would be a great idea. I probably will think that until the day I die. I really do believe that that would be really, really beneficial for everybody. I mean, the community and the people and the fathers and daughters and everybody. I just think that's a great idea. So anyway, well, do you have any closing remarks that you want to make before we?
No, and thanks for the opportunity to talk. I've been retired for about 5 years, but I still have a passion to do something in this line of work. And you are helping me with that. Other Inside Out Reentry and other folks in the community are helping me with that. And I'm trying to give of myself back to those organizations so that my experience from the past can influence and be part of what happens to improve outcomes for incarcerated persons in the state of Iowa.
And their families.
And their families and incarcerated persons.
Thank you very much, Jerry. I really appreciate your time and all of your wisdom. And I really appreciate that you're still involved and that you still are doing things and that you still care. That it wasn't, for some people, a job is a job. For you, it's more than that. And I really, really appreciate your compassion. So
thanks.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I consider you a friend.
I do. Just consider you the same.
So with that, we will close for today. And once again, I'm Sue Hutchins, and this is Iowa Prison Perspectives. And if you want to get in touch with us for any reason, if you agree, disagree, want to make a comment, whatever, please feel free to contact me at iaprisonperspectives@gmail.com. And it's iaprisonperspectives@gmail.com. And thank you very much. I hope that you found this useful, and I hope you will continue to stay engaged in watching these series. And if you like it, you can subscribe or hit the like button. So thank you very much, and I will say goodbye for now.